afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Everyone can hear me. Thank you. Okay, so I'm definitely going to take you to a completely different industry from what was being discussed just about a minute back. Let me begin by asking two very important questions that I ask each time I start. How many of you drove here? Okay, and how many of you took a cab? Well, that's a pretty equally divided room. That's interesting. Well, clearly the communications industry is doing something very different from the rest. I thought I'll talk about what we do in the mobility space uh, in a manner in which I can also help you in understanding what happens when you look at scale in mobility. And I think mobility is an industry that's as a term is used, abused, made models of. We hear about some or the other company raising massive amounts of money somewhere in different parts of the world. So there's a lot of interest in the mobility industry. However, what's happening is that and because this is a communications conclave, I must say that from a communications perspective, I think there's still a fair bit of ambiguity on what various players are trying to do. And in this short time that I have here, I'll try and explain what we are trying to do at Cars on Rent and through our various products at Cars on Rent. So beginning from the beginning, innovation at the core of scaling up, that's what I'm going to talk about. Every once in a while, what happens is that, and I love this quote, which says that a new technology, an old problem, and a big idea can turn into an innovation. And when you look at mobility as an industry, what is it at the core? It's just movement. It's movement of people from place A to place B. And we're doing it in so many different ways. We're doing it in so many different modes of transport. We're doing it through so many different technologies today. We're also understanding it so differently in different parts of the world. In India, we're still thinking about how will we get the next electric car and where will be the charging infrastructure. Elon Musk is sending people to space. Somebody in the middle is also saying, Google, for example, is saying, I'm going to get Waymo, which is going to drive people, and nobody will be driving the car as such. So there's a lot that's happening in technology, and everyone's trying to think about mobility from the perspective of the primary change that it can bring into the lives of people. Let's think about where this really comes across and why is this problem existing? Why are so many of us thinking about mobility? Statistics say that currently there are close to about 40 to 45% of the world's population lives in urban cities. By 2021, this number is expected to be 65%. And by 25, it is expected to be about 80%, which means everybody is coming to the cities. They're all coming for the little space that we have in urban areas. And which is why making sure that a lot more efficient mode of travel, a lot more efficient mode of transport becomes increasingly important for people. And that's why so many of us are working on it, including me, by the way. In the middle of this whole confusion around what's going to happen, how many people are coming, do I have time to park my car, do I have time to take the metro, how much does the cab cost, is the bus good enough, is there a charging point for the electric car that everyone's saying is going to come to India? I think the consumer is becoming far more intelligent. A lot of you are becoming far more intelligent. And you're all essentially getting to a point where you're saying that I don't really need to have assets as an owned asset. I don't really need to own cars. I don't really need to own a lot of the assets that exist, and which is giving birth to what we call the sharing economy. And I think mobility as an industry is probably taking the biggest advantage out of the sharing economy per se. What's happening really is that cars or any vehicle today is being innovatively built. So I spoke about examples of better fuel efficiencies. There are cars that are being built where you don't have to have a driver. There are heli taxis that are being built. Bangalore, in fact, I don't know if there's anyone from Bangalore here, but they've actually started piloting heli taxis. So a lot is happening in the way a car is being built, and a lot of it is governed through data. A lot of it is governed through feedback of how people are using the vehicles. And therefore, the cars are also getting smartly owned. The sharing economy is really an example of how cars are getting owned. And I was reading statistics from one of the big four, you know, consulting firms in the country, which said that the Indian consumer is 60 to 70% more likely to have an alternate mode of car ownership or vehicle ownership compared to the West. Which means that I think I think we're far more burdened with the idea of traffic and parkings and all of that. But also, I think we as a generation, because we are the youngest generation in the country, in the world, we also happen to have a far better idea of leapfrogging on the benefits of technology, the benefits of innovation. And obviously, therefore, the cars are getting better used. We are all looking at much larger utilization of a vehicle today. A car sitting at home, the car that you purchase, the car that you may have driven today, you probably end up driving it only for about 10 to 15% of the time for which you own it. And I think that's the change that car sharing companies, that mobility companies are trying to bring about. How do we make sure that with a lesser number of cars on the road, we're still able to move as many people as are required? So where do we come in? You know, cars on rent started like a lot of car rental companies started in this country, and we started about 20 years ago. The idea was largely, and you all come from organizations that may be using some of the other cab service provider in the market. And we started because we realized that 80% of that market was unorganized. And we said we needed to do something so that we can consolidate that market. And we started 20 years ago with that objective only. We've evolved to being a mobility service provider. And the idea essentially has been that I think we realized two primary reasons how people are using a vehicle. They're either using it themselves, they're driving a vehicle themselves, or they are using it with a driver, especially in the Indian market. And if you really think about numbers, there are close to about 3 million cars, new cars that are bought in India, and these are just passenger vehicles. These are cars that you and I buy. Which is a crazy number when it compares to the kind of growth that this number is having in India compared to the rest of the world, where there's actually a degrowth in the number of cars that are being bought. Even in the used car market, there's an equal number of cars that are bought. And if you just do some calculations, and I'll let you do the maths, the average price of the car is about 6 lakh rupees. I'll let you do the maths of what is the actual size of that market. And therefore, what we did was we said we don't want to be the boring cab company. We want to make sure that when we are going and servicing a corporate organization to make sure that their travel is efficient, we're able to, instead of becoming a cab service provider, we're able to become an intuitive smart commute provider, which essentially means that we're able to get each of the corporations to understand what can be more efficient than their current car buying or cab rental system. Which essentially means we create a system through artificial intelligence that allows us to predict all of your needs, that allows us to predict each of the segments of travel that you have within your organization, and therefore introduce efficiencies in the transport. The other part is car ownership, and that's something that's very close to my heart because we started it only recently, and we believe that car ownership needs to become far, far more efficient. We are today purchasing a car for a minimum of 3 to 4 years. We're also making sure that this car that we purchase is at a particular cost, and then we are bound by all sorts of aspects of the insurance, the maintenance, the various kinds of accident damages, repair works, et cetera, all sorts of technical responsibilities that we have to take up when we purchase a car. We are trying to change that by introducing what we call a car subscription. Now, what is a car subscription? It's a very simple product which says, if you decide to buy a car, you should only be able to tell me what is your budget per month, and I will tell you what's the best option for you, and then you only take care of driving the vehicle or get your driver to drive the vehicle, whatever is required. But you don't then have to worry about anything that's required within the purchase cycle of the car. Also, you don't have to commit to a particular car. You're subscribing. That's what subscribing means. It means you can subscribe to one, then subscribe to the other, decide what your product is, and just become a lot more flexible as a product, as an owner of a vehicle. So that's really what we are doing. Like I said, the market for us in terms of scale allows us to go to the 3 million users that are today looking at buying a car this year. And the growth of this market is expected to be at least about 10 to 12% every year for the next 5 years. So that's the behavior that we are trying to change as far as the market is concerned. I'd like to leave you with a quick video on introducing you to the new way of using a car or owning a vehicle. Very much, and I hope to connect with all of you and hopefully have you lose a zero sometime.